Plough got me into his office and he said, I want you to move up onto the wing. What do you think about that? And I sort of said to him, well, I don't, mate. I don't think about playing on the wing. And I was pretty worried. I remember shaking hands with Dave Mundy. I didn't really know much about him at the time. He was only a young player and we basically didn't see each other for the rest of the day. So I thought, how long's this been going on? The wing.
How good's a wing?
I did a lot of work on my hands after training, before training. It came naturally to me, it did, but I still worked at it, to get better. Look at these guys now and they're 200 centimetres, but they're so athletic. That is a really key trait that you need to be a key position player. He was sort of the first guy that I worked with one-on-one. He would have me kicking up and down the line of the square. We would just kick to each other up and down the line to just try and straighten out my kicking. You can't have any fractions here, there, you've got to have everyone in your club in line. I actually did go and seek out some advice from a leadership expert. I said, look, I want to change a lot of perception about me. I did miss some easy shots at goal. There's no doubt about that. Bernie Quinlan, right? He went at 58% and his nickname was Superboot. I went at 59, I'm the worst kick of all time. Get to as many contests as I can. I'm going to take more marks. Don't get outmarked, bring it to ground, and the rest sort of will take care of itself.
And that was this week's guest, Matthew Richardson. Welcome to the One-on-One Football Podcast. My name's Andrew Rains, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Harry Symington. Harry, welcome.
Thanks, Rainsy. Ripping episode we've just recorded with Richo. That was one of the most exciting, I think, especially if you're a forward. We've got a great episode coming up. It's it's always good to get back on the podcast and bring some more content out. Rainsy, for the episode with Richo, what can listeners look forward to?
Well, I thought he was just incredible. The way, obviously, he gave up his time. He's a busy man. A good mate of mine. He has been for quite some time since he got to Richmond. Took me under his wing. So he actually got me on his podcast a week or two ago on the Richmond podcast. So head over to the Richmond website to check that one out. But just incredible, Richo, in the way he presents each time you sort of speak to him in the media and then obviously in this podcast. And he spoke about just his time as a superstar Tiger, obviously a big club, and we obviously both played there when it was the Titans were sort of struggling a fair bit, but then how it's sort of changed over that journey. And he wasn't directly involved as a player when it changed, but sort of seeing he's still involved obviously with the club and in the media and things like that, and how he's sort of seen it evolve and the leadership under that. The pressure of his goal kicking, and he gets a lot of people ask how many points he kicked, and we actually delve into his ratio and his kicking percentage. Actually up there with some of the great goal kickers of all time, which he is one of them. Managing his injury in 95, he did his ACL and coming back from that, and expectations that come with being a young sort of superstar playing and then going down with injury. And then he's changing to the wing role in 2008. He went up the ground, and probably not to his choice, but came around and as we all know, came around up in a Brownlow, and then just playing to his strengths. So we talk a lot about his key forward craft and what it takes to be a really good key forward, but he also mentioned some of those strengths of being a key forward and focusing on those, and he's got a couple that he really focused on. And then we've got an awesome bonus episode there with where we do a live video with him, and we pick out a St Kilda player, Max King, and his forward leading patterns and his craft and his contested marking. Richo gives an incredible insight to our footy IQ. We talk about our footy IQ members and developing our footy IQ, and there's some incredible insights there to be able to play that key forward role. So without further ado, this is episode number 22 with Matthew Richardson.
You're listening to the One-on-One Football Podcast, the number one podcast for Aussie rules training, coaching and development tips. Richo, thanks for joining us, mate, and welcome to the show.
Great to be here, and good to see a familiar face and Rainsy, who I played a lot of footy with, so great to be on.
Thanks, mate. And obviously I was on your podcast a week ago. That was fantastic, and obviously it's good to see you a couple of times over 2 weeks, mate. So it's great to have you on. I'll just go back into sort of, as you said, obviously our relationship and coming through the Tigers. Obviously 2003, that we spoke about the other day, 2003, end of 2003 was my first year, and we had Spud and the likes, and some plenty of great memories down there at Tigerland. Just give us a bit of a rundown, obviously, of your up-to-date sort of life these days, transitioning out of the great Tigerland into the media world, and sort of what are you up to?
Yeah, obviously, I'm from Tasmania originally, for those who don't know. Came over to Victoria at the end of 1992 and played at the Tigers till 2009. And yeah, was lucky enough when I finished playing footy to be offered some roles in the media. I didn't know what I was doing at the start, and I maybe still don't now. But yeah, I was very lucky. 3RW Radio employed me in 2010, as well as Channel 7 on the TV. And yeah, luckily enough, I'm still working for those two organisations now and really enjoying it. Very, very lucky to be involved in football still, calling the games, and I love the industry. Do a bit of work for the Richmond Footy Club still. Obviously, Rainsy, you came on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, which was fun, and yeah, do a little bit of work for Sportsbet as well. So yeah, that's sort of what I'm doing now. It's full time, basically in the football industry, and really enjoying it still.
And kids, mate?
Yeah, got two kids and got another one on the way. My wife, Genevieve's pregnant at the moment with another little one. So two little girls, Riley and Zoe. Zoe is 5 in September and little Riley is 2 in June. So they're keeping me busy. When I'm not at the footy, I'm chasing them around, which keeps you young.
Yeah, for sure. Very busy man. And you mentioned Tasmania growing up down south. Mate, take us back to your childhood. When did you first fall in love with Aussie rules football?
Yeah, probably as early as I can remember. I can actually vaguely remember the 1980 Grand Final, which obviously Rainsy's dad, the great Jeff Rains, played in that premiership. So I can vaguely remember that game. I was nearly 5 years of age, and obviously my dad played for Richmond, played in a premiership in 1967. So I reckon it was around that time that I discovered footy. And then I discovered, that my dad had played for Richmond. I had no choice who I barracked for, but Richmond were a power team in those early 80s, and it was a pretty easy team to barrack for. So fell in love with the game then, started playing like most kids in sort of the mini league in under 10s. And, in Tasmania in those years, it was, basketball, a bit of basketball, cricket, obviously in summer, and footy in winter, and they were your choices. You didn't have all of the stuff that kids have now, so you were outside playing sport. If you weren't at school, I would have been outside with a football or a basketball or a cricket bat in my hands. So grew up in a place called Devonport, and that was my childhood, playing sport really.
And you came over, mate, father-son, similar to sort of the pathway of you and I sort of both took. It was a bit different sort of back in those days though. So talk us through the father-son rule and then how you sort of made your way over, and then talk us through a couple of your sort of first memories of Punt Road.
Yeah, so Rainsy, back then the father and son rule, I was actually put on the list before the 1992 draft. You didn't even have to go through the draft process. The father-sons do now, they have to still go through the draft. So, look, I knew I was coming to Richmond before the draft. I actually came over and watched the 1992 Grand Final as a guest of the Richmond Footy Club, and met my new coach, John Northey, who had just taken over at the time. So met Swooper. I was already over in Melbourne training when the draft happened. So yeah, came over at the end of 1992. My first memories of walking in the door, I actually came over on the boat. I brought my car over on the boat. I drove from Port Melbourne, where the spirit of Tasmania comes in. 1979 Commodore, Rainsy.
I was about to say, we spoke about the old cars last week on your podcast. So the old Commodores.
Loaded up to the hilt. No mobile phones or GPS then. So I had the old Melways. Remember the Melways you had to look in?
Yeah.
So I had to pull over and try and find my way to Punt Road, which took me about an hour. I got lost a few times from Port Melbourne to Punt Road, but I pulled in actually, and the first person I bumped into was Peter Schwab, who was the former Hawthorn champion, Schwabby, who was our reserves coach, and I remember he showed me around the joint. We didn't start training then until late in the afternoon, so I went in, had a look around, and met a few of the lads, and the rest is history. It was a pretty primitive sort of setup back then. They don't have the facilities they do now at Punt Road. We trained underneath the old Jack Dyer stand. The gym was in there, the change rooms were in there, and the oval was in pretty ordinary nick at that time. But look, I didn't know any different, mate, coming from Tassie. I couldn't wait to get stuck into it.
We probably could do another podcast on the characters of Tigerland and the coaches and all that sort of stuff. But clearly now you obviously see a difference where the club's sort of gone. And it was always sort of, and probably something that I was thinking last week when I was chatting to you guys, it was always sort of that powerhouse underneath and that sleeping giant. But it often got, and you would have experienced it too, finishing ninth and then playing some finals and then not, and then back down the bottom and a couple of wooden spoons and things like that. It always sort of played in the minds that we would come back and be successful, but it just took some time, didn't it? And what do you sort of bring that down to over the last sort of, obviously, sort of 20, 30 years?
Yeah, look, as you said, Rainsy, we knew Richmond were a powerhouse. I mean, when your dad played, Richmond in 1980 were the first club to have 1 million supporters go through the gate to watch them play in a season, in that great season that they had. So you always knew the support was there, and you knew that if they could be successful again, that the supporters would come back. And we had a small taste of it. In 95, we played finals. Unfortunately, I was injured that year. But you saw it in that year, when we made the finals, the MCG was full and rocking. And then in 2001, under Danny Frawley, we made finals again. But we just couldn't sustain it. We could never do it sort of consistently. Look, I put it down to good leadership, Rainsy. You get the right people involved. And, at the end of 2009, they appointed Damien Hardwick as coach. A good young coach who'd been at successful clubs, obviously a premiership player at 2 clubs, and then was at Hawthorn as an assistant. He came on board. Brendan Gale came on board. And Gary March was the president at the time, and he provided those 2 really good support. And you've got to have everyone in line in your organisation. That's the thing that I think I've learnt from Richmond in the last dozen years is you can't have any fractions here, there. You've got to have everyone in your club in line. That's your players, your support staff, your administration, your board. You've all got to be on the same page. And if you're not, I don't think you have success. And I think they all got on the same page under Brendan Gale's leadership. Had some good draft picks. Obviously, they got guys like Rance in and Cochin in and Jack Rewald in and Dustin Martin in. So they got good players in, good coaching, good leadership, and they were able to do the rest from there.
Yeah, for sure. And mate, something that really stood out in your game was your speed and athleticism, which is a rare trait for someone standing nearly 200 centimetres tall. How important do you think agility is for key forwards, especially in today's game?
Yeah, very important. It's such a hard game to play now. So if you're robotic and you've got no tricks, it's a pretty hard game to play. So I think you look at these guys now and they're 200 centimetres, but they're so athletic. And I think that is a really key trait that you need to be a key position player. If you're just running in straight lines, if you haven't got any agility and movement in your game, it's a hard game to play with how well they defend the ground now. I mean, when I was playing in the forward line, you didn't have zoning defences. It was pretty much one-on-one. So if you had any sort of agility and ability, you were able to break free from your man. Not easily, but it certainly helped. Whereas in today's game with zones, if you haven't got any movement, then I think you're going to struggle, aren't you?
I couldn't agree more, mate. It's sort of that thing too. I think you were the first sort of time, not for, like the first type of that prototype. It's sort of 197. What's Buddy be around 190?
Yeah, he's around that size.
198
yeah.
since sort of running. For the listeners to give you a bit of and I know he doesn't like talking about himself, a big fella, but he used to be able to do the tan.
I've started talking about myself more as I've got older, though.
You got to, mate. You got to relive the memories. The big fella and the tan. I don't know if in the northern states too many people know the tan, but Botanical Gardens, the running track around there, it's about is it 3.8, 3.9?
I think it's 3.86 from
with,
memory.
With a massive hill. To give you some idea how he could run, he could obviously keep up with sort of midfielders and smaller blokes like myself, and he was carrying sort of 20, 30 more kilos. But then even when you were younger though, mate, give the listeners for sort of some times you sort of ran in those sort of time trials.
Yeah, look, the best time I ever run, Rainsy, was 13:01, and I remember being disappointed because I think as a footballer, anything in the 12s was pretty elite. I think the best I saw at Richmond in my time was Daniel Jackson. He ran like a 12:30 something, and that was like off the charts, 12:30. So yeah, 13:01 was my best time. For not many footballers ever went into the 11s. I think Phil Carman did. I think he's got the record as a footballer. But anything between 12:30 and 13:30 was considered a pretty elite time for a footballer because obviously we're carrying more weight. So yeah, 13:01 was my best, and that's what I based my game on was ability to cover the ground and get to contests. And I think by being able to run 13:01 around the town, it certainly helped me on game day.
Absolutely. And on that, mate, like we're obviously big in our company and our business and what we talk about here on the podcast is actually finding that sort of, if it's an old theory, if you're doing exactly what everyone else is doing, you're probably not going to make it. So on the topic of sort of seeking that expert advice or getting actually that one-on-one sort of, training, whether it is at your club or your team or outside the club, did you obviously naturally being a really good runner, you're strong, lots of stuff, you obviously had some great footy IQ and skills, but Did you, any of those sort of, from a mental or physical aspect, did you ever seek outside sort of experts and sort of go that sort of one-on-one approach?
Yeah, I did. I always had mentors and people that I spoke to and trusted. And when I was growing up at the Devonport Footy Club, I remember a guy called Lance Cox who actually played for Richmond at one stage. I think he played about 50 games for the Tigers. He was sort of the first guy that I worked with one-on-one, and I'd go down to the footy club on an off night. And Lance, he was a busy man, but he would come down and just kick with me. Look, I wasn't the greatest kick, and I had to work at it, hard to sort of get to the level. So Lance would take me down and do kicking with me one-on-one, and he's the first guy that I probably did some one-on-one work with. And then even when I got to Richmond, the great Michael Roach,
Disco.
who you know well, Disco Roach, he would come down and do kicking with me as well. And one thing I remember him doing with me, I had trouble with my goal kicking over the journey, and Roachy would have me not even kicking at goal. He would have me kicking up and down the line of the square. We would just kick to each other up and down the line to just try and straighten out my kicking. So, yeah, they were a couple of guys that I did one-on-one training with over the journey. But I think as a player, you've got to work out, what your strengths are as well. You've got to work on your deficiencies, but then you've got to work out what you're good at. And I knew that I was a good athlete for my size. I had good running ability. So, that came naturally to me. It did, but I still worked at it, to get better. And my marking, I felt like I was a good mark. So I did a lot of work on my hands, just getting people kicking balls into my hands after training, before training. As a kid, I always, had a footy in my hands. So you got to work on your deficiencies, but it's probably even more important to work on your strengths as well and make them even stronger.
Yeah, that's awesome. And mate, back in 1995, you unfortunately tore your ACL and missed most of the season. But then you came back the following year, played all 22 games, kicked 91 goals, and became an All-Australian for the first time. I'd love to know what your mindset was like during that injury, and how did you get back to playing arguably the best footy of your career just 1 year after an ACL?
Yeah, I remember when it first happened, I was obviously pretty shattered, because we were having a good year. I think we'd only lost one game when I did my knee in round 9. We were 8-1 after that game. So I knew that we were probably going to play finals. I was young though, so I got over it pretty quickly, and my mindset then became, you had a lot of people in the periphery saying, Richardson's athleticism will be gone. Will he come back? Will he be able to play the sort of footy he was beforehand? Will he be able to fulfil his potential? And that was the noise that you could hear. So my mindset was, I'm going to prove all these people wrong. I'm going to come back and I'm going to be better than I was before. And I remember when I was doing my rehab through that whole period with the help of some good medicos and fitness people. They deserve a lot of credit, but my mindset was I'm going to prove people wrong. So that really drove me through my rehab. The other thing, I had Tony Free, who was our captain of the Richmond Footy Club at the time. He did his ACL about 5 or 6 weeks before me. And Freezer was a mad trainer. He was a really determined guy, Tony Free. So we were basically doing the rehab together, and we sort of drove each other on, which I think helped as well.
And the rest is sort of history after that, mate. And your playing career sort of obviously went on to some huge accolades and became a superstar of the competition. But I've heard you talk about before too, and this is good for our listeners, that not necessarily go through form stunts. I wouldn't say you went through form stunts, but there was people obviously, I reckon you went through probably a middle part of your career there. It was probably just before I came down there. When I reckon I went down, you went again right to another level. Was there sort of that middle part of your career where you sort of had to change your mindset? There was that, sort of outside noise and media talk around sort of obviously your hype on the field and things like that with some carry on. But what does sort of those things have to change, and what did you feel in that middle part of your career that you sort of had to sort of to sustain to where you got to go again and up another level? Yeah,
you're right, Rains. It was just before you came down. I reckon 2002, 2003 were sort of years where I went backwards a little bit in my career. There was injuries and reasons why, but there was also an attitude. I probably had a poor attitude at that time. I was getting injured. We sort of came off playing finals in 2001, and then the next year we dropped away again. So I was probably disappointed in how I was playing, how the team was playing, and I let it affect my mindset probably too much. Had an attitude out on the ground, and I probably didn't know it as much at the time, but in hindsight, looking back, I definitely affected how I was playing, my attitude and my body language and things like that. So I actually did go and seek out some advice from a leadership expert. I did a one-on-one course with a guy, and I went and sat down with him for 6 months every Monday, and we just spent a couple of hours talking, and he would just pepper me with questions about my growing up, and I didn't really know what he was doing, but he was sort of almost reprogramming me. And when the first meeting I had with this gentleman, he said, "What do you want to get out of this?" And I said, "Look, I want to change a lot of perception about me, and I want to by the end of my career probably have how I'm seen in the game to be different." And I think from that moment on, I think I harnessed that emotion and look, that energy that I had in my game, I think I harnessed it in a more positive way, and probably played my most consistent footy from that time on, from 2004 till my retirement. Probably didn't have quite the highs in my game, but I didn't have the lows either. I just became a more level, consistent player. And yeah, it was important because I was 28, 29 at the time. Could have gone the other way. I could have really dropped away. So yeah, changing that mindset and attitude and harnessing my emotion and energy in the right direction was good for me, and probably good for my teammates around me. I probably had a better relationship with them as well.
Was that something you sought out yourself, the leadership expert, or was that through the club? How did that all come about?
Probably myself in the end, but I did have conversations with people at the club, and there was probably talk that Richmond at that time were perhaps looking to get a trade and get me out of the place. So I had some hard chats with the leaders at the club at the time, and Kane Johnson was someone that had done this course as well, and sort of followed him a little bit. So yeah, it was a combination of everything really, myself and leaders at the club, and just everyone knowing that something had to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And mate, in 2008, you famously made the move from key forward up to the wing, where you ended up averaging 11.1 marks, made the All-Australian team again, and finished third in the Brownlow. Whose idea was it to move you up to the wing? Because it obviously paid off.
It was the coach, Terry Wallace. Yeah, the player. I remember walking into the club, and I've told this story a lot. It was after round 3. I played full forward for the first 2 or 3 games, and wasn't playing that well, and I'd lost a bit of pace as well. I was 34 years of age, and I just couldn't get that metre on my opponent inside 50. So I was really struggling to win the footy inside 50. And Jack Riewoldt was at the club. I think, was he in his second year probably?
Yeah, I reckon he was second year, yeah.
Second year. I walked into the club after round 3, and Plough got me into his office, and he said, "Look, mate, we've got to make some changes. We've got Jack at the club now. We think he's going to be a good player, and we're going to you too much inside 50, and Jack's probably starving a bit in there, so I want you to move up onto the wing. What do you think about that?" And I sort of said to him, "Well, I don't, mate. I don't think about playing on the wing." And I was pretty worried. But the option, he was pretty blunt about it, Plough. He said, if you don't take this on board and you don't, look at this role and take it with both hands, then you probably won't be playing. You probably end up at Coburg. So that was the option, and we played Freo that week over at Subiaco, and I moved up onto the wing, and yeah, for whatever reason, it was a good move. I had a little bit more space and time. I still had good running ability. It didn't quite have the pace, so the wing was probably a good role for me at the time, just getting back inside 50, defensive 50, and then pushing forward at times as well. So it really worked for me, and it probably helped Jack as well, Rainsy, didn't it, at the time? He probably got the 50 a little bit more to himself and developed a little bit quicker.
Absolutely. I think I remember that sort of stage, and I think we lost the first 2 games. I actually did dislocated my patella in round 2 against North, and we got smacked, and then you guys went over to Freo and had that famous sort of win. It was a huge win at the time too, I reckon. And I remember watching you obviously playing the wing, and then Jack's game obviously just grew from there, which I think sometimes you sort of take those sacrifices, and it was a win-win, I suppose, in the end. And
yeah, it was. I remember that day. I played on David Mundy, who's bloody still playing, isn't he? He's a star of the game, and I remember shaking hands with Dave Mundy. I didn't really know much about him at the time. He was only a young player, and we basically didn't see each other for the rest of the day. So I thought, how long's this been going on? The wing.
How good's a wing?
Yeah, a bit of space.
Well, if you can play it right, it can be a really good position. Some of our junior listeners would sort of, we get some feedback sometimes, and when we're coaching these kids, they do struggle to wing roll a bit. But if you can, as you said, if you can sit behind the footy a bit and then go from there, and then you can hit the scoreboard too. So you just play up and down, which is what you were able to do. But and you were still able to sneak forward and kick some goals, which is great. I want to touch on the goal kicking topic, and couldn't imagine how much it frustrated you, but we used to go to give the listeners a bit of a background. We used to go to clinics with Richo, and he'd get always asked the same stupid questions from the same old nuffies, and they would say, what's wrong with your goal kicking, or how many goals you kicked or whatever. And Richo used to sort of come back and there was some stuff where he just sort of played the straight back. But I remember it was like how many goals you kicked, and he'd ask the question, they'd sort of say, how many behinds has you kicked? And I remember looking at your ratio, and you've always said that your kicking ratio was pretty good, and you did kick 800 more than probably those people asking the question. So talk us through a bit of that sort of enigma, or the sort of the talk around your sort of goal kicking.
Yeah, it was always the topic, and it still follows me now, Rainsy. Whenever I go and do a function, people normally, you get introduced, and the MC or whatever, they always mention your numbers and whatever, and there's always someone in the crowd there, how many points so Richo? So it's become a bit of I have fun with it now.
Yeah, you got to play with it.
You do. But I'm not going to lie. It did affect me through my career, and I did miss some easy shots at goal. There's no doubt about that. But my actual percentage of, my ratio wasn't that bad. I mean, most players sit between, if you look at the top goal kickers in the history of the game, most people sit between about 60 and 70%. Tony Lockett was at 70, and then I was actually 59. So most of the top goal kickers sit in between there, a lot of them around 64, 65%. So I was a little bit below the guns, but I wasn't hopeless. But what I think probably hurt me in the perception of my goal kicking was I did miss some real sitters, some 10 metres out, but then I might kick the next 3 or 4.
Yeah.
But people just remember those real howlers. So that probably tainted me a little bit.
Yeah,
I always have a joke about it though. Bernie Quinlan, what was his nickname, Rainsy?
The Super Boot.
Super Boot, Bernie Quinlan, right? He went at 58%. His nickname was Super Boot.
Super Boot, there you go.
I went at 59. I'm the worst kick of all time.
Well, mate, I know how you feel, and it's a perception too. My field kicking got sort of for a couple of years there, it got absolutely sort of smashed too, and then you go in your head a bit. It starts getting your head a bit, and you're sort of thinking, you just got to go back to, so some of our listeners out there, if you are struggling with goal kicking or field kicking, it is getting in your head and people are talking about it, just go back to the basics and try and block out that noise. It is hard to block out, but staying on the sort of that key forward goal kicking sort of subject now, mate, what's some of the key attributes? I obviously played with great forwards like yourself and Jonathan Brown and Fev for a year or two there at Brisbane, but Brownie always used to talk about some of the key aspects of a forward. Mentally is a huge thing too. So obviously the physical attributes, which I think you spoke about, but he always said you sort of got to have, and there are sort of personality traits in forwards and defenders, the way they sort of go about. So the forwards they want the footy in their hands. They've got to have a bit of that sort of extroverted. And a tiny bit of sort of arrogance bordering on sort of overconfidence. Would you agree with those sort of quotes? And what are some of the sort of the makeup for a key forward, those young listeners that are looking forward to sort of playing that role?
Yeah, look, I guess you do have to have that bit of X factor and a bit of ego and enigma about you to be a good forward, I think. I always base my game on work rate and contest. I knew that the more contests I got to, the more marks I would take, the more shots at goal I would have, or the more ability I would have to give it off to someone else in a better position. So it was pretty simple for me. My work rate, get to as many contests as I could, and if I couldn't mark the ball, don't be outmarked. And that was probably how I rated my game. And if I didn't if I started thinking about goals, that probably didn't happen. So I took it right back, simplified it right back to that. Get to as many contests as I can. I'm going to take more marks. Don't get outmarked. Bring it to ground, and the rest sort of will take care of itself. And they were sort of the key aspects I took into each game.
Fantastic, and it sounds like you'd make not a bad coach, mate. Have you ever thought about coaching or specialised coaching? I mean, have you been hit up by the Tigers before? Is that something that you have sort of thought about, finishing footy? Obviously, you've got a great sort of gig now, but the things too, I know we've caught up a few times, you said you do miss things, that being in the media that versus sort of the sort of club day-to-day stuff. Is there that aspect of sometimes you think, oh, shit, I sort of wouldn't mind doing a bit of coaching or sort of leadership stuff?
Yeah, look, I think not actually being a coach, Rainsy, but I do enjoy talking to young guys about their footy. And over the years, I've spoken to players that have seeked out a little bit of advice. And I do enjoy having a look at their game and being a sounding board for them and being a bit of a one-on-one sort of mentor. I do enjoy that, and it's something I'd like to keep doing in the future with young players, talking to them about their game. It doesn't have to be AFL. I mean, a former teammate of mine, David Burke, He's got a young son who sought me out a little while ago and just wanted to talk about footy. So I do enjoy that sort of thing, just talking to young players about their game and being more of a mentor, I guess.
It's amazing. I think any young kid out there would jump at the opportunity, and it gives you sort of that feel, that kickback feeling that obviously when you're a young player, if a sort of an older sort of mentor, an established player like yourself would giving some feedback, I'm sure they'd listen, which is brilliant.
And I think a young player, if someone shows a bit of interest in you, I mean, it does make you feel good about what you're doing. So yeah, I do enjoy doing that.
All right, and that brings us to the end of the main episode, guys. But don't go anywhere because Richo actually hung around for another 10-15 minutes. At the end of every episode, we record a bonus segment exclusive to our Footy IQ members. And today, Richo hung around and we talk about Max King, one of the leading and most exciting young key forwards in the competition, obviously from St Kilda. Now, what you're about to hear, whether you're on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, what you're about to hear is the audio from that segment. But of course, there's a lot of reference to the screen in the video. So if you're a Footy IQ member, jump over to your Insights library on your dashboard and you'll be able to watch the full video there. If you're not a Footy IQ member yet, it's free to join. There's a 7-day free trial on at the moment. The link to join is in the show notes. So if you like what you hear from this next bonus segment, I'd highly recommend jumping over to the Footy IQ membership. You'll be able to watch the whole video plus loads more content like it, especially if you're a key forward. You do not want to miss this. About 10 minutes of absolute gold from Matthew Richardson. So that's it, guys. Jump over to Footy IQ website. If not, here's the audio. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the new bonus podcast with Matthew Richardson today, and we've just finished recording the main episode on the One-on-One Football podcast. So to make sure you go back and listen to that one with talk Richo's background, working his way through injuries and the ups and downs of being a superstar player, and some key forward craft tips in there. In this bonus segment, exclusively to our Footy IQ members, we're going to pick Richo's brains about talking through 2 video clips on St Kilda's Max King and get Richo's expert opinion on what goes into playing the position of a key forward like Max. Richo, thanks for sticking around, mate, and we're looking forward to this bonus episode.
Pleasure, Rainsy. Looking forward to it.
So we've just got the clips. We've got the first clip up here, mate. We're just going to talk about Max King's positioning, and I might get you to sort of point out some things, but I'll lead the first part as the ball sort of goes. So St Kilda win the footy here. It goes into the inside 50. So if you just pause when it's in the air, so about there, just a tiny bit more, Harry. So if it's there, just notice the 2 players there, Harry, if you sort of pause that. 2 GWS players in front of him. I see a lot of forwards these days, and I know I used to think about it too as a player when you're developing that sort of aerial, even a sort of a specky sort of mark or a contested mark, worrying about those 2 players in front of you. Talk us through what your sort of mindset there is when you got 2 in front of you.
Yeah, I guess, the first thing I'd take out of this clip is when Josh Battle wins that ball back there in the middle of the ground. So as a key forward, you need to make sure that you are 1 kick away from the kicker, right? And I think Max has done that pretty well there. He's realised where Battle is. He's probably got his positioning pretty right there. He's no more than 50 metres away. So that'd be my first point. You've got to know your teammates, and you can't be too far away. There's no point in being 20 metres back there, and there's no point being too close to the kicker as well. I think a lot of the time forwards can make the mistake of getting into no man's land. So Max, the first thing there is I think Max's positioning was really good. Now he's competing against 3 there, basically. Now, as I talked about a little bit earlier in the podcast, his mindset there has got to be that I can't be outmarked here. I'm outnumbered, but I can't be outmarked. And the other thing he's done really well here is he hasn't got too preoccupied with those 2 defenders. You can see his eyes. His eyes are only for the ball there. I think at times forwards can sometimes get worried about those defenders and look to make contact with them. His only sort of focus there is the ball and launching at it. And that's the thing. He's 200 centimetres. He's got long arms. If he launches and takes that ball at its highest point, he's not going to get outmarked, is he? The only thing that can happen there is he's going to mark it, or it's going to come to ground, worst case scenario. The other thing he did really well, his direct opponent behind him there, is he did make contact with him initially. You'll notice if you go back. He made contact with him, but then he released. He didn't get tangled up. So that's the other important thing here. Yeah, he's got his direct opponent who wants to put some heat into his body. Max does make contact with him, but then he releases. He released really well. He knew where the ball and the drop zone was, and then he launched at it. And, that is a great example. He could not have he could not have played that situation any better there, Max King.
Was perfect. That's why we want to sort of highlight, and I think he's in really good form this year, and it's a player that we've been watching, and we thought obviously your opinion would stand out here in a similar sort of type of player. With back to that sort of when you're looking at, are you looking? You can see the players in your periphery a bit. Is it like you still know where they are, but you're sort of more focused on the ball?
Yeah, he knows they're there, doesn't he? But he's made the ball his focus. He knew that he'd got rid of his direct opponent behind him there, and he would know that those two guys are there, but he knew that he could launch. He knew he could get a run and jump, and I think he just backed himself in there. He knew that if he launched, he was probably the only person that could mark that ball. Worst case scenario, as I said, it's coming to ground, and I think that's Dan Butler on the bottom right there. He's in a good position too to crumb that ball. So if Max doesn't mark it, I reckon it's going to drop straight in front there, and then the crumbing players can come into it. Absolutely.
And the last one, just on this clip, mate, in the northern states, a lot I see it being involved in the sort of the pathway stuff originally, and trying to get crossover sports, kids like basketballers playing footy or athletes just crossing over, and they jump off 2 feet. What's the importance of here jumping off the one leg?
Well, firstly, a bit of protection for yourself as well. You're going to jump higher off that one leg as well, so you're going to take the ball at its highest point. So it's important that you jump off your jumping leg. And if you play basketball, that if you're going up for a layup, you're doing a similar thing there, aren't you? You're going to lift your knee, but it's a bit of protection as well for yourself. You jump off both legs there. You leave yourself a little bit open to being injured, if a defender coming back or someone coming into you there and your rib cage is open. So a little bit of protection there as well for yourself, 100%.
Awesome, and we'll go to the next clip, Harry. So we've got 2 clips here. We'll go to our last one. This is a bit of a different clip in terms of the mark, and just more so his work he does sort of off the ball. We'll get behind the goals vision here. We'll just play it out. So it'll come inside the forward 50. Just pause there, Harry. So you'll see Max and Richo. I'll get you to talk soon, but I'll just intro it. You can see Max sort of pushing back. So one forward's going at the footy, and then one forward's coming back. And we work a lot on this with junior kids, talking about forward leading patterns. It is quite a craft, and I think it is actually the hardest position to sort of coach at times, to play and then obviously coach. So just talk us through the importance of multiple leads and creating your own space and isolating your defenders here, and talk through the clip for us.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than 2 forwards going for the same ball. So firstly, that's Ben Long, I think, that leads up. It's Bradley Hill's kicking it. So at this point here, if you pause it there, Long's in the better position for that hit-up lead, right? So Max has identified, this isn't my ball here. Long is the man. He's going to hit up. So he knows he's got space behind himself here. So he's going to let Long hit up. So he's made the right decision there. And then he knows that he can then get in behind the defence here. So he's got grass behind. So he's identified the space, and that's what you need to be able to do as a forward. You don't want to be going for the same ball. So both of those players there have done really well. Good communication. They've probably done this at training. Max also was probably never in the right position to win that ball. Hill gets it on the wing. Long's in the right position. So he's now thinking, where's the next kick going? He knows he's got space behind.
So pause there. So, and just on that, it was actually a really good point, Richo. So in junior footy, we see a lot, mate. Even in pathway footy and elite sort of under 18, under 16s, maybe even sort of the next level up, I see a lot of kids or a lot of young forwards come at the footy too much. So you either got them coming away or they're going too far back, but they push too much density up the field. So then when the midfielder looks up, he's got nothing to kick to. So is there something around that sort of they can work on, sort of with their craft?
Yeah, that's right. That's knowing the kicker as well, and you can't get too close and keep hitting up at the forward. So you've got to identify. And King knows there that he's not going to get the ball on the lead. He's no point hitting up there. He's not in the right position. Long is. There's no point both of you hitting up. So you need to make sure that, as I said in the previous clip, that you're a kick away. You should always be a kick away, and he's probably a little bit in between here in that positioning. So he's now thinking about the next ball, and that is the one in behind, and he's made the right decision there.
And we'll just keep going, Harry. We'll play this out, and just when he sort of goes to launch now. So pause there now. What do you think he'd be thinking now?
Well, that little leading pattern there. He's looked. There's no point leading wide. He knows that. Long's wheeling around. you got to know the kick. You got to make it easier on the kicker as well. And if he had kept leading into the pocket there, that's a hard kick for Long. He's got to kick that around his body. It's a low percentage kick for Long. So he knows he's reading the eyes of the kicker as well. The kicker's probably not even kicking it to him here. He knows that he's just kicking it long to a dangerous spot. So he's read the eyes of the kicker. He's not going to go to the pocket. And he knows that's going to be a long high ball that's probably going to get in behind.
And then the next probably part of this one is isolating sort of that still one-on-one. So if we pause there, there's obviously nothing's perfect in footy. That's sort of it's they're getting close to each other. Obviously with if I've got enough confidence to come over and spoil that from another defender. But what's a dangerous part of this sort of clip now look like for St Kilda and Max?
Well, the part here is you don't want both of those players launching for the ball, and King's probably the better marking player, and they know that. There's good communication there. Is it Membry, I think?
Yeah, Membry.
Behind him, Tim Membry
he
there.
Just pulled out.
He's made the right decision there. He knows King is able to launch at this footy. There's no point him going as well, so he's actually stayed down. He's made a really good call. Nathan Broad's his direct opponent. He's got to stay with him. And King was always in a good position to launch at that footy because the defender was playing him in front. So just again, really good communication by both those key forwards. Membry knows King can launch, and he's just put a little block on Broad. And the rest is history here. I think he kicks a goal, plays on.
He'll play it through, Harry. No, that's excellent. We'll play it through fast again, just one more time. So you talk through sort of this last bit.
Yeah, so I like that. He went to lead to the pocket. He knows that the kicker is not going to be able to do that, so he gets out of that lead. He could have gone through with the lead and left Membry run out. That was a decision he made there. If he keeps leading up, his direct opponent may have dropped off Robbie Tarrant and then made it a 2-on-1 on Membry. So it was an unrealistic lead, and a good defender will know that you're not going to get that ball. So Jeremy McGovern or a good intercept player, if he keeps leading to the pocket there,
the
defender's not going to go with him, and it's going to leave a 2-on-1 with Membry. So he did make the right choice there, probably to back out of that lead.
Oh, that's excellent. And Richo, how you seen his year, mate, and his progression, young King? Yeah,
really good. I mean, he's really playing to his strengths. He knows that he's got great height, 200 centimetre key forward. So he times his leads well. He knows when to lead up. He knows when to stay back for that longer option, as we've seen in these two clips. And he's not getting tangled up with the defenders. He's making contact with them, but he's then releasing and playing to his strengths, which is launching at the ball. And when he does that, he's not going to get outmarked. He's going to at least mark it or bring it to ground. And I think his goal kicking, I think he feels more confident. I know he had a bad one last week against the Giants, but in general, looks like he's straightened his kicking out a bit. So he's got his mindset right there as well, Rainsy.
Mate, that was incredible insight, and we really appreciate your time today to be able to sort of give us 45 minutes of your time. Obviously, I know you're a busy man during the footy season, young family, and just obviously your expertise. And I think that'll go a long way to help. It's actually a question we get asked a lot through our membership and also through our coaching. Is a lot of that sort of forward leading patterns and young forwards, and then A, how do they play it, and then B, how do you coach it? So some incredible insights there, mate. Again, appreciate your time today. Those who want to sort of watch a bit more of that clip, you can head over to the Footy IQ membership to watch the full video. Over to you, Harry.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Rainsy, so we'll have, for those listening on Spotify or Apple, the full clip will be on the Footy IQ membership. So we've got the link in the show notes if you want to have a look at that one. And Richo, that's about all we've got time for, mate. Thanks for joining us. I know I learned a lot, and hopefully all the listeners did too.
Yeah, no, great to come on board. Love what you guys are doing, and it's a great platform for young kids if you want to improve your game, one-on-one footy. I'm following you guys on Instagram and on the socials, and if you want to improve your game, I think it's a great way to do that.
Thanks, mate. Might have to get him as a guest session on sometime down there, Harry. Might have to get down and get him on board. So
you can't afford me.
No, exactly. Well, it's not like that one. I knew it was one was coming. Oh, that's great. No,
I'm joking. I'd love to help out anyone for sure.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate your time, mate. And enjoy the weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the One-on-One Football Podcast. If you got something out of today's episode, we'd love it if you could leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to stay updated on special guests, new episodes and more, please subscribe to the show on your chosen platform. And finally, if you have any questions for Rainsy or myself, or you want to get a particular guest on the show, please reach out. Our email address is podcast@oneonfootball.com.au. Thanks guys, we'll see you for the next episode.